Good afternoon, everyone. I know you already saw me today, but I feel like it wouldn't be this conference unless I spoke something about my work at prison, because I've done so for the last 2 years. But instead of speaking with Dr. Watt about orality, I brought on my colleague, Rebecca Andrews. Rebecca and I have presented at national, regional, and state conferences together, and we worked together at SCI Pine Grove, where she still is employed. And this was a topic that came up for us that we felt very strongly about. And our title is Voices of the Soul Behind the Walls, Orality, Dignity, and the Language of Respect in Forensic Counseling. One of the things that happens is that we hear from our clients in the prison is a theme of disrespect. And it's an ongoing, that they feel disrespected by the corrections officers, by the staff, by the system, and that the system is out to get them. And so we're going to talk about that.
Yes, our topic points from our paper include the narratives of disrespect, so really helping to deconstruct what that looks like, the behavioral interpretations that come from staff, defining the problem and how this influences the impacts of what happens when we misinterpret their narratives of disrespect. And then we'll talk about trauma-informed perspectives, a narrative psychology lens, dignity-centered frameworks, and integrating all of those together to be able to truly help someone feel seen and heard.
Spoken narratives of disrespect. Perceived disrespect, procedural injustice are among the strongest predictions of conflict, misconduct reports, and deterioration in therapeutic alliance within secure settings. I'm going to give an anecdote here that just happened recently. I have a client who has gotten in repeated trouble, and he's in the restricted housing unit where I work, and he was feeling very disrespected. So he created a stinger, and a stinger is whenever you plug something into an electrical outlet to create a source. He used the stinger to set a roll of toilet paper on fire, used the toilet paper to set his mattress and pillow on fire, and claimed that he was being disrespected and misused by the corrections officers, and that's what forced him to this level of action. So as I'm speaking with him, he's repeating the same theme over and over again for about a half hour. And internally, I'm kind of rolling my eyes. But I continued to listen because I was thinking about this work. And at the end, he said, "Thank you. That was very therapeutic to get that off of my chest, to be heard." So these grievances, these descriptions of conflict with staff, this system is consistent with this disrespect theme, and it often results in this extreme behavioral acting out.
So when we look at the interpretation of disrespect, it is viewed primarily through a behavioral or risk management framework, categorized as indicators of oppositionality, manipulation, entitlement, or noncompliance. Treated as surface-level behavioral complaint approached through boundary setting, behavioral intervention, or disciplinary response, and then that gets communicated and translated to other staff through written reports, behavioral logs, diagnostic summaries, what's called block cards, and those are basically just a behavioral report of an inmate's behavior on the shift, and that gets carried over to the next shift, and the actuarial risk assessment and treatment plans. So lots of these behaviors become viewed through the staff's lens, and then that just gets passed on to the next shift and the next staff member.
So as a result, this inmate was put on what we call a 709. So he was given just boxers and a t-shirt, no toilet paper, no mattress, no pillow, because he was deemed unsafe to have those things. So further continuing the disrespect level. These oral narratives and this perceived disrespect are layered with natural history, trauma triggers, and identity threats, but they're replaced with shorthand of non-compliance and hostility, okay? It's much easier to blame the system that you have become part of than to blame a childhood neighborhood, family systems, or one's own behaviors for where you find yourself. It overlooks this psychological harm, relational harm, and existential dimensions. Do I have a greater purpose? Is it just to set fires in myself? And these narratives, they become lost because at this point we're worried about the safety, the management of these individuals, and we're instructed or mandated to have care, custody, and control. So if somebody's setting a fire, we don't have much control right there. They're putting themselves in harm, so there's no care. And it goes on. And so it's this battle back and forth.
So that brings us to the trauma-informed perspectives. Being able to recognize that individuals with a history of complex trauma demonstrate heightened sensitivity to perceived relational threat, status violation, and invalidation of past experiences, and those translate into current perceptions. So I'm a firm believer that we all have scars and stories, right? Every single one of us. And the thing about our current perspective is it's not just about what's happening now, it's about the things that we've been through. So a trauma-informed perspective really honors that our past influences our present. Those verbal protests about disrespect are not merely reactions to present moment interactions, but are often trauma-shaped signals emerging from accumulated histories of powerlessness and moral injury. Expressions are attempts to assert dignity, restore moral balance, and protect a threatened sense of self.
When we look at these human beings and their history, they are organizing their experience through their lens, through their identity of their community, their family systems, and they're trying to interpret, and those are the lens that they're looking at, the schemata, if you will. The repeated complaint themes should be read as meaning-bearing communications rather than behavioral descriptors. And when he was brought to the restricted housing unit or the whole, his narrative was, I was kidnapped out of my home in general population and brought to the restricted housing unit against my will. Which is sort of funny, but it's not, because he's in prison and he broke the rules, so that's why he was brought to the restricted housing unit. But that places all of the blame on staff and it places all in a level of disrespect. So within the correctional environment, autonomy is restricted. He doesn't get to decide where he's living. Formal power is limited. Those inmates don't get to shower when they want. They don't get to often do the things that they want to do when they want to do them. So they're asserting agency in what ways they know how to or available, that they feel are available to them. So the complaints of disrespect function as these moral narratives as they identify violation, assign responsibility to that, and implicitly assert a standard of treatment that the speaker believes has been breached for them. So I have rights and you're violating those those rights is a summary of that.
And to continue from the narrative psychology lens, those narratives of disrespect may represent efforts to defend the personal dignity in environments experienced as chronically invalidating, and repeated allegations of disrespect can be understood as attempts at identity preservation and moral self-assertion. So really being able to recognize that behavior is meaningful. And when we can understand the context of where those behaviors originated and truly their stories and their narratives, then we are able to intervene effectively.
So what we often hear is that's not psychological, that's behavioral. And we disagree.
Absolutely.
So dignity-centered frameworks allow us to reposition that narrative of that's not psychological, that's behavioral. Dignity is increasingly recognized as a core psychological and relational need, closely linked to identity, worth, and social recognition. So oftentimes street cred, I'm going to use my prison slang from a few years ago, street cred is very important. So my word, my credibility, my reputation mean everything. Okay? Common threats to dignity in correctional settings include experience such as dependency, surveillance. We have camera cells in the restricted housing unit. Power asymmetry, and are often associated with distress, anger, withdrawal, and protest behaviors. Hunger strikes, fire setting, throwing feces and urine are all common behaviors in our environment. For those who have experienced trauma, these dynamics may reactivate earlier experiences of degradation and helplessness, and even if they see somebody else in the unit protesting and experiencing some sort of, not retaliation, but control from the officers, OC spray, things like that, that will also trigger, and they will be, these COs are mistreating us, this is happening, and it becomes a collective groupthink. A dignity-centered framework can recognize these spoken narratives as verbal indicators that an individual perceives a threat to their personhood, their status, and their moral standing. Disrespect complaints become appropriately conceptualized as dignity alarms rather than behavioral opposition.
And to combine all of this, we look through the lens of integrating a trauma theoretical lens, narrative psychology, and dignity frameworks. And those complaint narratives of disrespect are conceptualized as dignity-centered, trauma-shaped expressions of their inner life. It honors the psychological, relational, and moral meaning of these experiences that are ignored within traditional institutional literacy systems. And when dignity is affirmed, individuals experience themselves as seen, recognized, and morally included. So you can see where being able to truly recognize their experiences and their background helps us be able to communicate in a way that the individuals feel seen and heard. And at that point, then we're able to offer a lens of help.
Exactly. And that's our final thoughts.